Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Los Angeles Lakers. Right now, we're in trade deadline season. We're a couple of days away, actually less than 48 hours till the trade deadline itself as I'm recording this, and there's not really a lot of action going on. There's, of course, rumors going around, but no trades have happened over the past couple of days. Nothing is really set in stone, not even like a, hey, this trade's being worked on, it'll probably happen. We're just sitting here and waiting, and while we're waiting, one of the most interesting teams going into these last 48 hours are the Los Angeles Lakers, a lot like was the case at the deadline last season. Hasn't exactly been the best year so far for the Lakers going into the deadline. They just played their last game before it. They're sitting at 27-25, have racked up 3 wins in a row, so they're turning things around a little bit. They've been better as of late, have some easier games coming up, but still being 2 games above 500 and currently sitting as a play-in team isn't exactly where the Lakers probably wanted to be at this point. And me personally, I thought the Lakers were going to be way better than this to begin the season. Last season, they of course went to the Western Conference Finals, made some big trades at the deadline, and I liked their offseason. I thought they made good acquisitions that helped support their weaknesses. They still had LeBron James, still had Anthony Davis. If they could remain healthy, this to me felt like a team that could try and compete for a championship out west and would probably end up as a top 4 seed in the conference. Instead, they've hovered around 500 all season, and again, are currently a play-in team, not that far from being able to play in entirely. Now, they're not necessarily dead in the water. There is still a lot of season left to play. They're not that far behind some of the teams ahead of them, although it will take a lot of sustained play to catch some of those teams that are playing really well at the moment. The deadline is here if they want to go ahead and make some upgrades. And after last season, again, there is a formula set up. They turned up in the second half of the season, made some big deadline acquisitions, and even though they ended up in the play-in, still found their way to win the first series against Memphis, who were injured. They might have still beaten them if they were healthy, but then they beat Golden State, ended up getting swept by Denver, but kept the series close. This is a team that has shown an ability to turn it up when they need to most. We saw in the in-season tournament. We've seen it in some games recently. Whenever it's a high-profile matchup, they seem to show up. But it's a team that's very inconsistent at the moment. And there's a couple of things that make me less confident in the Lakers going into this second half of the season and eventually the playoffs than I was last year. The first thing is that the Western Conference just feels better than it was last season. Last year, like the Clippers were injured, the Suns traded for Kevin Durant and didn't really have an offseason to reshape the roster, so they were a bit hit or miss. The Warriors were having a really weird season all year with their road woes. This season, the top teams in the conference are the Denver Nuggets, who are the reigning champions and have the best player in the world. The Clippers, who are playing some of the best basketball we've ever seen from the franchise. The Timberwolves, who are a defensive juggernaut led by rising superstar Anthony Edwards. The Thunder, who are also being led by a rising superstar and MVP guy in Shea, have great players on both sides of the ball. They don't have a lot of experience, but just in terms of teams that are really good at this point, the Thunder are up there in the conversation with the best of them. And you still got the Kings, who are really good at the 5th spot, the Phoenix Suns at the 6th spot right now, who've really started to figure things out, and between Book and Kevin Durant have one of the most formidable duos in the entire league. Even if you go down to like the 7th-seeded Pelicans, they've got a lot of talent over there. The Mavericks, of course, have Luka. Anything's possible with him. That's 8 teams that the Lakers are going to have to potentially compete against, and at the very least, they're going to have to pass one of those teams to even make it into the playoffs in the first place. You've also got the fact that trying to make acquisitions at the deadline is difficult because this deadline already feels kind of dead, and there aren't a lot of big difference makers. This is also a Lakers team that is without assets more than they really ever have been. At least last year, they had a couple of first-round picks to mess with. Now, they've got one and a guy in D'Lo that doesn't seem like a lot of teams want, even though he's playing really well at the moment. Under most circumstances, this Lakers squad feels like a team that may consider being sellers at the deadline. They won a championship a few years ago, have had some good runs, but they're currently underperforming, don't really have a lot of assets to upgrade. Maybe they could look to recoup some of those assets by blowing it up, trading away their stars, guys that they could get a lot of value for, restarting a new era. They have a couple of young pieces, but could bring more in through trades. It feels like a team that may consider a rebuild under normal circumstances, but one thing drastically changes things for LA and has for years now, and that is the presence of LeBron James on the roster. It's really hard to actually undergo a rebuild when you have one of the greatest players of all time on your roster, especially when it's a guy who's still playing at a ridiculous all-time level. This season, he's putting up 25 points per game, 7 boards, and 7.6 assists, while shooting 52% from the field and 39% from deep. He was named an all-star starter. He's still all-NBA caliber. He's still really good. It has reached a point where he's no longer a consensus best player in the world like he used to be. I probably would have him on the verge of being outside the top 10, probably is outside my top 10 players if I had to pick, but he is still really good, and that's understandable at his age. He's 39 years old, has played like a billion years in the NBA. It makes sense that he's no longer the best player in the world or even maybe one of the top 10 guys. But the problem with that is he's no longer capable of carrying a roster to the NBA Finals like he used to be able to do. I mean, back in 2018, that Cavs roster had no business being in the finals, but LeBron found a way to will them there anyways. This version of LeBron can't really do that. Even though he does have Anthony Davis alongside him, it still doesn't feel like enough because the roster is incredibly flawed. They've got a lot of inconsistent players surrounding those two guys, not a lot of shooting. That should probably be the priority on a team with LeBron and AD on it. Plus, both their stars in LeBron and Anthony Davis have dealt with a lot of injuries as of late. They've been up and down at times. It's just not a team that feels like it has the capability to compete with some of the best teams in the Western Conference on a night-to-night basis. There were certainly some nights where they're destroying the world and it looks like this team could beat anybody, but there are a lot of other nights where they're pretty underwhelming and it's just disappointing compared to what I thought we were going to see from them coming into the season. And with the team being underwhelming so far, it seems like LeBron is putting some pressure on the front office. There have been cryptic tweets like when he tweeted the hourglass emoji with all the sand towards the bottom of it, indicating that something or someone is running out of time. There was when he tweeted about New York, like the day after some guy dropped a rumor that the Lakers could be looking to trade him. People thought that indicated him saying, hey, I could go to New York potentially. So Lakers, do something, convince me to stay here in the offseason. And of course, it just seems like it's a theme that LeBron always tries to push his front office to make the deals whenever they can to make this team better, which makes sense. LeBron, one of the all-time greats, wants to probably grab at least another ring before he retires. He wants to compete in the twilight of his career. And right now, this Lakers team doesn't feel consistent enough or good enough to really do that in a stacked Western Conference and NBA as a whole. But at the same time, while we're hearing reports that he's pressuring them, we're also getting reports that the Lakers may stand pat for the most part at the deadline because they don't love a lot of their options out there, which also does make sense. It's not really a market full of a bunch of difference makers. It seems like the asking price for a lot of these guys, at least at the moment, it might change before Thursday, but for the moment, the asking price is pretty high for a lot of these players, and any deal that they make that helps this team significantly probably cost them a young player like a Jalen Hood-Schifino, maybe Maxwell Lewis, who they both just spent draft picks on, and neither have been big contributors at the moment, but could be pretty good down the line. Maybe Max Christie, who's a young contributor, and probably their final tradable first-round pick up until 2030, which would indicate pretty much the complete exhaustion of their assets. And it's no guarantee that any deal that you make does anything for you. And again, a loaded Western Conference, especially because one LeBron James or Anthony Davis injury and your chances of competing are completely over if they weren't already. But at the same time, you've already mortgaged the rest of your future, and it feels like you've got to at least try and help LeBron James compete here at the end of his career. There was a report that when he signed this recent contract extension, one of the stipulations was that the Lakers would do whatever they could to upgrade this roster. And if that's the case, they're probably obligated to try and do so, to try and give LeBron James as much help as he can get to try and compete for another championship. And the Lakers just as a whole are a historically great franchise. They want to rack up titles with or without LeBron, and I'm sure they want to do it with him, with one of the greatest players of all time, wearing the purple and gold. They don't want to give up on this era. They want to keep this thing going. So there's reasons for both making trades but also holding on to your assets, especially because LeBron is a free agent at the end of this season. There's a good chance that even if you make deals, if you underperform, he could just walk. Even if you do perform well, if LeBron wants to go out there and play with Bronny, who may be entering the NBA draft next year, there's no guarantee that he's going to stay regardless of what you do, because he may just walk anyways to go team up with Bronny James wherever he ends up getting drafted, or if he goes undrafted, wherever he signs. So it may not really matter whether you add pieces or not. So at the moment, the Lakers are kind of stuck. You want to help LeBron James win, get him as much help as possible to try and give him a chance to win another ring like you seemingly agreed on. And I imagine they will make some type of improvements to this roster. I'd be surprised if they did literally nothing. But whatever you do adds on to the lack of assets you have to build for the future, especially post LeBron and maybe even post Anthony Davis. Even if Bron stays, how much longer does he have in the league? And Anthony Davis is getting up there too. He's heading into his 30s. How long is he going to be good? And if LeBron James ends up retiring or walking, is AD going to want to stay? And if he does, how do you get him a co-star, especially when you give up all your future assets to make any type of deals? Maybe you can lure a free agent over. I mean, you are LA. But if you don't have any assets or great supporting pieces around Anthony Davis to help entice that star, how are you going to get anybody to come over there? So you're just in a really weird spot at the moment with having LeBron James on your roster. You got to try and compete, but you're not a great team at the moment. You could do nothing, but then you risk him leaving. Honestly, the best course of action to me may be to just trade everybody. Trade LeBron, trade Anthony Davis, start from the beginning. Obviously, they're not going to do that, but in a vacuum, it might make the most sense. Imagine the value you could get back for LeBron James and Anthony Davis. AD probably gets you multiple first-round picks, young player salary for LeBron, even though he's on the last year of his deal. If a team that he gets traded to can get assurance that he's going to stay, you could probably get a bunch of assets from him too. Even if he isn't going to stay, half a year of LeBron James is still very valuable to a franchise. They're going to get a lot of ticket sales. They're going to get a better chance of competing because he is still really good, even if he's not quite the player he used to be. D'Angelo Russell could probably get you some type of return, even though it isn't probably going to be the best. I think Taurean Prince could get you some assets amongst some of your other players. You could probably keep like Austin Reeves, Max Christie, Maxwell Lewis, a couple of other guys. Like, you're not going to be a very good team. The future doesn't look super bright for the Lakers, but if you bring in some young pieces potentially through a trade like that, a bunch of draft capital to recoup your assets, it could look a lot brighter. Plus, then you clear up a bunch of space to potentially add free agents in the future because you always are going to be a high-level market. Honestly, it might make the most sense, and it may be the smart move long-term. Now, there is no way they would do this. You don't want to be the team that traded LeBron James. You do still have him and AD on the roster, which makes you feel like you have a chance. They're both all NBA talents. And so trading them while they're still really good feels kind of crazy. But in a vacuum, it might make sense for the Lakers to blow it up again. I think there's no chance they do. But it would be really interesting if they went that route. I talked a little bit earlier that there was a rumor that circulated that the Lakers were looking to trade LeBron, and it got me thinking about what that would look like, and that's part of the inspiration for making this video, but also just the weird situation the Lakers are in. They're one of the most fascinating teams in the entire NBA to me because they've got two really talented players, have just kind of failed to build a supporting cast around them the past few years. There's questions about their coach. They always feel like big-time players in the trade market, but don't have a lot of assets because of how they built this team in the first place. And we don't know what LeBron and AD's futures look like. What do they do after those guys leave? It's probably going to be a big down period for the Lakers, but they can always bring in free agents. They're just in a fascinating position to me, and LeBron James is at the center of this whole thing. To me, if he was just some other all-star, potentially all-NBA caliber player, him and Anthony Davis were here, I think they would be way more likely to consider a rebuild. But because they have LeBron James and the status that comes along with him, they're not going to consider doing that. We'll see what they do at the deadline. I don't know if anything they do is going to be enough to push them, but again, last year, they managed to find their way to the Western Conference Finals anyways. They've turned it up in big-time moments. They do still have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They're definitely a wild card out there in the Western Conference. I'm excited to see where they go from here, and definitely got to keep an eye on them the rest of the season, and especially in the offseason. What's LeBron going to do? What does AD do from there, depending on what LeBron does? And eventually, when do they consider blowing this thing up? I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Let me know down below what you would do if you're the Lakers. Would you consider blowing things up, starting a rebuild? Would you hold on to these guys, try and make some trades around the edges, maybe just trade LeBron or just trade Anthony Davis and try and build around the other guy? I'm just curious to know what y'all would do. But for right now, I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, stay back.